Just imagine for a second. You buy a brand new car, you drive it off the lot, and you hear this constant, annoying rattle. And then you find out that rattle was put there on purpose. Now, that quote you're seeing, that's not from some movie. That was the actual reality at what was once one of America's most dysfunctional auto factories.
So today, we're going to dig into the incredible story of that exact factory. It's a story about how a place that was considered the absolute worst of the worst, well, it completely transformed into one of the best on Earth, all by embracing one single radical idea.
So, here's our game plan. We're going to start with the absolute chaos, then move to the unbelievable experiment that somebody actually proposed. After that, we'll see how a new culture of trust was built from the ground up, and finally, we'll unpack the powerful leadership model that made the whole thing possible.
Okay, let's dive right in. We're heading back in time to the early 1980s to a General Motors plant out in Fremont, California. And when I say it was a disaster, I mean that's putting it mildly. This plant wasn't just, underperforming a little bit. It was in a state of all-out war between the management and the workers. I mean, just look at this stuff. This wasn't something that happened every once in a while. This was daily life. We're talking workers drinking on the assembly line, widespread drug use, and yes, even sabotaging the very cars they were supposed to be building. The relationship with management was so bad, it was basically a Cold War, fought right there on the factory floor. And this number, wow, this really says it all. 25%. That was the daily rate of absenteeism. Just think about that for a second. On any given day, 1 out of every 4 workers just didn't even bother to show up. You can't run a business like that. It's impossible. So GM did the only thing that made sense. They shut it down. They gave up. But then something truly impossible happened, which brings us to our next chapter, the experiment that was about to change everything. In a move that absolutely shocked the entire auto industry, GM teamed up with Toyota. They created a whole new company called NUMMI, that's New United Motor Manufacturing Incorporated, right on the site of that old failed plant. The idea was for GM to finally learn Toyota's legendary manufacturing secrets. Now, this is the logical next step, isn't it? You've got a factory that failed because the workforce was frankly terrible. So when you reopen it, you clean house, you start fresh, you hire a whole new crew. It's a no-brainer. But nope, Toyota did the complete opposite. They had one non-negotiable condition. They insisted on rehiring the very same people who had been drinking and fighting and sabotaging cars just a couple of years before. To GM, this must have sounded like complete and utter insanity. But to Toyota, this was the whole point. And this slide just lays it all out perfectly. It shows the massive difference in philosophy. GM basically thought their workers were the problem. Lazy, untrustworthy, gotta be managed. Toyota, on the other hand, had this core belief that the system was the problem, and that deep down, nobody actually wants to do a bad job. If you just put people in the right environment, they'll thrive. So how did Toyota actually turn that philosophy into reality on the factory floor? Well, it all came down to building a real culture of trust, and it was symbolized by one incredibly powerful tool. See, the Toyota production system was built on a simple idea: empower the people who are actually doing the work. Every single worker on that line was given the authority and the responsibility to solve problems as they saw them. And the ultimate symbol of this trust was something called the Andon cord, a simple rope that anyone at any time could pull the entire assembly line if they spotted a problem. Okay, so picture this scene. It's just a month after the plant reopened. There's a worker, let's call him Joe, and he's having a hard time installing a taillight. He's fumbling with it, he's falling behind schedule. And then, who walks up but the president of the whole company? Now, back in the old GM days, Joe would have been screamed at for slowing things down. He's probably thinking, oh man, I am toast. But the president, Toyota, he didn't yell. He didn't even look angry. He just looked at him and said, Joe, please pull the cord. And the worker was just stunned. You didn't pull the cord. Nobody ever did that. But Toyota insisted. And what happened next changed everything. The entire line ground to a halt. A team of engineers immediately swarmed the station, and working right there with Joe, they figured out a better, easier way to install that part. The message that day just echoed through the entire factory. We don't punish people for finding problems. We thank them, because that's how we fix the system, together. So, the big question, did all this trust stuff actually work? Oh, you better believe it worked. Just look at this data. Daily absenteeism, it plummeted from that insane 25% all the way down to just 3%. People actually wanted to come to work. And it gets even better. Get this. Using the exact same workers, in the exact same building, this plant went from being GM's absolute worst to one of the most productive, high-quality auto plants on the entire planet. One magazine at the time put it perfectly. Hell had frozen over.
So what's the big takeaway here? What's the lesson from this incredible turnaround? Well, in our final section, we're going to unpack the huge lesson this story holds for pretty much any organization out there. There's actually a name for what Toyota built at NUMMI. Researchers call it the commitment model. And it's a simple but really profound idea. It's the belief that your number one job as a leader is to get the culture right, to build that foundation of trust and psychological safety. If you can do that, the great products, they'll follow. And this isn't just about, feeling good or singing Kumbaya. It's built on real, concrete promises. NUMMI guaranteed job security. They promised to cut executive pay before they'd ever lay off a line worker. They created actual systems to make sure every single suggestion from an employee was heard and taken seriously. Management proved with their actions, not just words, that they had the workers' backs. So ultimately, the lesson is that trust just unlocks human potential. When you treat people like they're trusted partners, when you give them real control over their own work, and you show them that you are genuinely committed to their success, they stop being just cogs in a machine. They become owners of the outcome.
And that really brings us to the final question, the one for you to think about. In your own job, on your own team, do you feel safe enough to pull the cord? Does your culture empower you to point out a problem without any fear of being blamed for it, so that everyone can rally together and fix it? Because the story of NUMMI shows us that the answer to that one question, well, it can change everything.